on the left-hand side, okay. So the next speaker is JB Rainsberger. The man is very famous among the programmers out there. Everything's got to do with test-driven development, or even test-driven design, evolutionary design. He is great at this. I just did a workshop with him, okay, for 2 days, and even though I'm not a professional programmer like other people, I really enjoyed his course. He did a great job of bringing, in many ways, the human complexity behind, like programming in reality is complicated. People are complex, okay? But there is no programming without people. And he has a great take on that. And this talk is actually going to be, there's not going to be one line of code in this talk, okay? So you can all agree that if you're not a programmer. If you're a programmer, you might be slightly disappointed, but I think there's enough videos around you can see that. Okay? So, Jamie, over to you.
Well, thank you very much for priming me. I beg your indulgence, I'm going to do something that appears amateurish. I'm going to read a fair amount of this, at least until we get to a point where I feel like I've said the really important part. This stuff here I want to make sure I say well, which is why I'm going to read it, which would ordinarily make me look like a total amateur, but I'm trying to convince you that that's not what's happening here. So I beg your indulgence. I want to get this right. So first, it's great to be here. And I know everybody always says that, but I actually really mean it. I haven't been in a long time. I spent a lot of time in Bratislava over the last several years, and I feel like I'm looking longingly over at Vienna saying, I wish I were still there. It's not that I dislike Bratislava, it's that I really do like Vienna. My background, as you can tell from the name, the background is actually, there's some Austrian in the background. I got a chance to visit where my father grew up in Vienna a few years ago. And so it's always nice to be in a country where I introduce myself as Rainsberger because it's easier for people to understand. So thanks very much. What follows here are my opinions. Usually, I think speakers probably don't say that often enough. Based in part on my experiences. They reflect my values. I'm trying here to live my values up to the limit of my comfort, live it up to the limits of what I'm willing to do. And if we don't disagree at least a little, then probably that means I didn't say anything very interesting. I would like to make a case for the selfish team player, especially in the typical corporate environment of the average software development professional. Not that you're average, but the average of who is average. By definition, that's what average is. Now, I asked on Twitter what comes to mind when I use the phrase selfish team player. And a handful of people answered, and their answers were overwhelmingly negative, which kind of surprised me. So there are many team players who are selfish and bring benefits to the team as a byproduct. Getting in the direction of where I want to go. But then I thought, my good friend Geza Mihala said, it's an oxymoron, as a negative word, it taints. Typical Hungarian directness. Someone who's loyal to their team but has an adversarial or competitive attitude towards others within the company. Interesting. Does high value work, but jumps the line of cards and stories to get the ones that have the most visibility or the most fun, will advance my career the best, will be best for me. And actually surprising, well, no, I wouldn't say that. We all cooperate. And also we have selfish motives, and so what we're looking for is a balance between those two. Just getting in the neighborhood of what I want to say. And then my good friend G. Paw says, of course, historically or currently misreworded person. And I have no idea what he meant by this. Well, I should say I wasn't sure what he meant by this. And it turned out that what he meant is the selfish team player is someone who grew up in a system that taught them to be selfish even though they wanted to be a team player. And so in all of these responses, there seems to be this implication that there is some kind of competition or contradiction between selfish and team player. And what I'd like to do is to offer another perspective, another potential interpretation. So I don't mean team player, I mean it in the positive way, not in a cynical, sarcastic way that's commonly understood in the student. I don't mean the kind of you're not being a team player that you might see in, say, a Dilbert cartoon, or that you might hear some the highest paid person in the room say to you because you're trying to tell them the project is about to crash into that wall at 150 kilometers an hour. I need someone who contributes to the team's success out of a genuine desire to do exactly that. And I think the contradiction isn't necessarily in selfishness and team player, but the problem, I think, is that we have some strange ideas about what it really takes to be a team player, and that we don't really create the space to allow ourselves to be a team player. I don't mean someone who sacrifices himself heroically out of a sense of duty. I don't mean somebody who turns the notion of being a team player into a moral question and does it out of some kind of altruistic, not altruistic, does it out of a sense of some kind of social obligation. I genuinely mean somebody, I mean something closer to the idea of enlightened self-interest. A phrase that I'm sure some of you still have some slightly suspicious views about. Exactly how enlightened does he mean and how can he use that? So, my wife Sarah and I started traveling together for my work 11 years ago. We were lucky enough that after we left Toronto, where we both grew up, part of the reason that we left Toronto was because living in Toronto was too expensive, and so she sold her business, and she started traveling with me for work, which was not very pleasant, because then being away from home didn't mean being away from her. And certainly, as we all know, if pair programming is good, then pair traveling is even better. For practical reasons, as well as it's nice to have somebody to come back to the hotel to at the end of a long, stressful day. And we were in, now that is what helped us make the best out of being in a place like Malvern, Pennsylvania, USA. And if you've never heard of Malvern, Pennsylvania, USA, it's essentially a place where nobody lives because there's only office buildings. So everybody lives around, they come into Malvern to do work, and then they go home because nobody wants to be there. And we ended up, now of course as the consultant, I ended up staying there because I needed to be a 1.2 kilometer walk from the client site, otherwise I couldn't go there. Because there are no taxis in this place. So I had to do the walking distance, which means that we were stuck at this place called Baxter's Restaurant, which is exactly as it sounds. Standard, boring, American neighborhood restaurant. I'm sure they did their best. We sat down and we were discussing some stuff, and I had recently heard Stephen Covey talking about how he decided with his family to try to build a mission statement for the family. It sounds like such a Stephen Covey thing to do. And Sarah and I share one trait that really helps our marriage, and that is that we're both willing to try silly things to see what would happen. In fact, she's the one who tries to have more options, and I'm the one that's trying to converge to a solution. And as I'm desperately trying to converge to a solution, I'm tired of hearing more options, and I start screaming at her, please don't give me more options. Then she says the magic words, I have a crazy idea. And we usually end up doing that. Because that usually ends up being the best idea. And not just because it comes from her, but it actually does end up genuinely being the best idea. So at any rate, we thought, well, we talked all through dinner for about an hour and a half about what we tried to draft a mission statement for our family. It's just the two of us and, at the time, 3 cats. It's not a big idea, it's not a big enterprise. It was just like, if we had a mission statement, what would it be? And so we ended up settling on this. This seemed to strike a good balance between sort of sounding mission statement-y while actually representing something of substance and real value. And I didn't really think about it again. So this, as I said, I think this was 2007, 2008. It was an interesting exercise. We just sort of put it away, and that was the end. So this was kind of a way of articulating this idea that we had about enlightened self-interest. I now understand, 10 years later, looking back, that what we were trying to do was articulate and this notion of enlightened self-interest in a way that seemed to align with our values, that made us feel like we were still being good people, whatever that means. So when I talk about selfish team player, I need somebody who relentlessly invests their spare capacity, increasing their own overall capacity in order to be able to give more of that to the system. Whatever the system is. The system could be the group of people they work with, it could be the code base they're working on, it could be the department, the company, whatever. Your system is your business. I need somebody who takes it upon themselves to use their spare capacity to try to improve what's around them. And they're doing it out of a genuine desire to make things better however they can for everyone. Now, unfortunately, this approach does have some risks. Right? So I focus inward on making myself the best me that I can be as far as, say, a producer or a software developer or a tester or whatever. I focus on my own skill and improve my own capacity, and that way I can then invest that back to the rest of the system. The problem with this, of course, or the risk, not necessarily a problem. Right? A risk is a problem that hasn't happened yet. A problem is a risk that has happened. Okay? Risk Management 101, you know, are all certified in basic risk management. Congratulations. From the outside, it's awfully difficult to tell whether somebody is a selfish team player or just selfish. That's a matter of trust. For which you go read the 5 dysfunctions of a team, and then you learn that trust is the centerpiece of everything. It's the foundation of all teamwork and communication. There you go. That's a 1-day training course. Done. Congratulations, you're certified in that. Start with trust. Without trust, the rest doesn't matter. And that's a big risk. It's very easy it's hard to tell the difference between a selfish team player and someone who's just selfish. And that can create some conflict. It's not easy to see, you can't really tell if they're a selfish team player until you start seeing them actually reinvest their spare capacity in helping other people. Until you start to see it, you won't trust it. Now, what this means is, when we see that they actually reinvest their increasingly spare capacity, then we can start to distinguish between the selfish team player and just the selfish person. Now, I really don't like this approach. I don't like this approach that I'm going to spend all this time talking about. And the reason I don't like this approach is because I would much rather just go right to the finish line. I would rather just give of myself freely, because we all live and work and do things together in a system that rewards that behavior. Unfortunately, most of us don't live there most of the time. And that makes this sort of, I don't really know how to label it, that makes this sort of indirect way of getting there necessary. I wish I could trust the enterprise environment more. I wish I could approach it more openly. I just don't feel safe doing that. In part because I don't think it would work. And in part because the enterprise is not a person. So with apologies to any of the USAians in the audience, corporations are not people. Please tell your government. I can't trust a corporation. It would be foolish. You can pretend to trust some people, or you can pretend to trust an organization when really what you're doing is trusting individual people. But I can't trust a corporation. And so I can't approach it with the same level of trust that I can approach with individual people as I get to know them and trust them and love them. So that forces me to sort of stick with this workaround, where I have to focus inward and then try to increase my influence over the whole system. At best, I can learn to predict a non-trivial amount of the enterprise's behavior, but I can never really trust it. There just isn't anything there to trust. Unfortunately, one of the reasons that I can't trust it is because I have, and I'm guessing you have also seen many, many examples of the enterprise in some way wasting your work. You produce this beautiful work, and the enterprise does the equivalent of setting fire to it from you. And you come back the next day and you produce excellent work, and they set fire to it again. I spent 3 years writing code in IBM, and no customer ever came close to it. There were 17 people between me and the customer. I counted. Now, not everyone lives in quite a dystopian environment as that, but it's actually it's 2 or 3 steps away from being that bad. They're just, unless you get a chance to go work at Semco. How many people here know who Ricardo Semco is? Maybe have read Maverick or the 7-Day Weekend. Yeah, unless we're going to work for them, then you're probably going to be in a similar kind of environment. You can't really trust the enterprise to use the products of your work, to use your capacity to really produce value. It seems to me that if a company actually does turn our capacity into value that aligns with our values, that happens more by luck than anything else. Now, remember, this is all my opinion. This is based on my experience. Your mileage may vary. It's possible that you have managed to find yourself in a situation where things are much rosier than that. And if you have, congratulations. I'd like to have a chat with you. We sit down over wine and talk about your experiences, and maybe there's something I can learn from that. And I don't want to take too cynical a view. I don't want to paint a bleaker picture than there really is. But I feel like if I don't talk about how bad things have been for me in this area, then I can't approach this topic honestly. And it's very important to me to make sure that I talk about this honestly, about why this selfish team player might be, this model, this idea might help. I would really enjoy having more trusting relationships in my life, especially in my work. That would reduce my stress considerably. And what I've learned over the years is some tricks for developing and building that trust. That's part of what I want to share with you today. Now, as a coach, and I mean coach in the good sense, not in the Agile coach sense. You heard me say quotation marks around Agile coaches. I'm not saying Agile coaches are bad, I'm saying Agile coaches leave something to be desired. This is where we will eliminate the 14-minute rant about the Agile industrial complex, a term which I absolutely love, by the way. Of course, none of us participate in the Agile industrial complex, right? We're all genuine coaches who give ourselves to the people around us. We're consultants in the good sense, the Jerry Weinberg, influencing people at their request sense. That was come back to him in a moment. We learned that, your job as a coach is not to go up and just provide solutions, right? Your job is not to upload information into other people's heads, but instead to create the environment in which they naturally learn what they need to help themselves, and they learn how to help themselves, and they learn how to learn how to help themselves, and all this good stuff. The problem is, I don't have time for that. I don't have energy for that, and I don't get money for that. Right? At some point, I need to see some concrete improvement, at least in myself, and in the best case, in the people around me. The people whose work directly affect my ability to do my work, and so on. We're essentially impatient in this way. And so, here's the first idea I have for how we can focus on our own, capacity, so that we can invest in others. So this is the first, I know it maybe looks a little hand-wavy, I promise you this. This is the first suite of concrete tricks that I use to help in my sort of evolution as a selfish team player. So this is the only time you're going to see TDD in this entire talk, as just a bubble. And please don't assume too much about the title of Proven Path to Effectiveness. That is for marketing reasons. It's a joke. Just like I named my first TDD course the world's best introduction to TDD, level 1, not because I think it's the world's best introduction, even though I think it is, but because it makes people laugh, and when they laugh, they tend to reach for their credit card. That's all it is. Proven in the sense, if you prefer, take proven in the sense of tested. I have tested it. I don't know if it works for everyone, but I've done it, so it's tested at least once. So here's me. I'm still tired, I'm not as stressed, and I'm not as very bored. And if you read any of your early HP programming books, once the manifesto came out, one of the next interesting discussions was how do I get people to try this stuff? And the best answer we had in the early 2000s was, well, you really have two choices. Either you wait until they have nothing left to lose and then finally they'll listen to you, or you engineer a crisis so that they, which is really pushing the fast forward button on getting them to the point where they have nothing left to lose and then finally they'll listen to you. Again, it's the old joke that Americans will always do the right thing after they've exhausted all the other alternatives. So when you have nothing left to lose, then it becomes easier for you to just start doing something. Now, I teach a lot of programmers. I work with them fairly frequently. And after I start teaching them sort of how I program, and they realize how much work it is to program that way, even though they kind of see that it might end up being better for them down the road, the first thing they say is, the problem is I don't have time to write all these tests. I don't have time to run all these tests. I don't have time. I don't have time. I don't have time. That is not the moment to try to have a discussion about how this is going to help them in 2 years. Because right now they don't have time. The problem is that as soon as you say, I don't have time, you've lost the game. Has anyone in the room here read the book Planning Extreme Programming? So the people with the beards and the gray hair, with the gray beards, they're the ones who read it. So this is the book by Ken Beck and Martin Fowler that nobody remembers. And in there's a chapter title there's a chapter that deals with this question of, I don't have time. And the chapter title is wonderful. It's too much to do. And the chapter begins with, as soon as you say you don't have time, you lose the game because nothing you do will create more time. There are 23 hours and 56 minutes, roughly speaking, every day, and there's nothing you can do about that. I guess you can move to another planet, but then that changes the game entirely. You can't create more time. So as soon as you say that you don't have time, then you've lost the game. Instead, focus on the fact that you have too much to do. And why does that help? Well, if I have too much to do, then there's kind of an obvious solution to that problem, isn't there? It's 2 words. Do less. Now I'll go back to this echoes something that Kevin talked about earlier today. He didn't actually say the words sooner, not faster. I wanted to scream them at him, but I thought that was bad for him. I don't actually care. Agility is not only not about speed, it's not even about trying to increase speed or any of that kind of stuff. It's about getting done sooner instead of faster. See, if you tell people to go faster, then they just start typing faster. But if you tell them, maybe you shouldn't do all that typing. Maybe you should spend a little bit more time thinking, asking questions, talking to people. Then you can really live one of the key points of the Agile Manifesto. Simplicity. The art of maximizing work not done is essential. We want to figure out the 70% of things that we shouldn't do, and then, not do them. It's the not do them part that gets hard. Anyway, so organizations in the large have this problem. People at the small have the same problem. And that's why, after about the first day and a half of working with a new group of programmers, we invariably end up talking about how they need to get their workload under control. I promise you, I am not turning this into a getting things done cult revival thing. Okay? Anyone who knows about getting things done understands that as soon as you put a name on an idea, then it becomes a religion. I guess we're at an Agile conference, so we know that already, right? So when I talk about GTD, I'm not talking about getting things done because I want to anoint you all as getting things done accolades. I'm just telling you I didn't work on my machine, so maybe it'll work on your machine. And so the nice thing about getting things done is that it gives you a place to start getting your workload under control. Now recognize now, again, if a programmer tells me that they have too much, they don't have time for that, and I say, no, you have too much to do. You say, okay, yes, I understand you, I have too much to do. The next thing you do should not be to give them a 240-page book review, because they already have too much to do. So I tried to make it easier for them. Can you handle 5 pages? And if you can't handle 5 pages, then let's try this. So I'm going to give you the beginning of getting things done right now. It's called the 2-minute rule. If you know what the 2-minute rule is, go to sleep for 2 minutes. The 2-minute rule says that when somebody asks you to do something, if it takes less than 2 minutes, then just do it now and get it out of the way. And if it takes more than 2 minutes, now you have to plan it. And the funny part about the 2-minute rule is that we do a very poor job of figuring out what 2 minutes is. So literally, I recommend setting a timer, because 2 minutes goes quicker than you think. Anything that takes more than 2 minutes needs to go through the system and be planned. There you go. There's your beginning of getting things done. So you use that for a while, and that helps you. Then I might be able to convince you to read 5 pages. And then if those 5 pages help you, then in 6 months you might finally have enough time to sit and read the book and learn the rest. The nice thing about using getting things done as a starting point is that it is there to help you build your spare capacity in 2 ways. At first, it helps you get control over the work that you're doing. And then as you read on more, you get past the whole checklists and processing your inbox and all that stuff that's really about the mechanics of figuring out when to do things and having the reminders that tell you when you need to start another project. And then you get to the point where you start to realize that getting things done isn't just a way to organize doing the same amount of work. It is a way to confront you with the idea that you're not going to be able to do all the good stuff you're doing. All the stuff that you want to do, you're not going to have time. Your breath is going to run out before you get that list done. Start making peace with that now. This is a wonderful exercise that I do with some people. When we get to talk about this, I'm not being hired to teach something programmery. Then at some point I get the chance to have this nice exercise. I recommend this for you, not now. Sit down, take a piece of paper, and write down all the things that you think you want to do in your life. Like all the things you want to achieve, and frame them as projects. So not like I want to be the world's best baseball player, but like I want to spend time doing this, and I want to spend time doing this, and I want to spend time doing this. Frame them as projects, as things you would do. Renovate the house, write a novel, that kind of thing. And then take some wild guess as to how much time it will take you to do it. Doesn't have to be precise at all. Wild guess is fine. People say estimate when they really mean guess. I find that all the Anglo-Saxon words for these things are much more honest. Estimate sounds like something weird than guess. We just say that everything's a guess, then perhaps people will take it so seriously. So you just write down, okay, I think this will take 2 years, this will take 3 months, I can do this in 2 weeks, probably. And then you add it all up. And you add it all up and you just drop the insignificant parts. And probably when you add it all up, it'll be measured in decades and years. If I do all this stuff, it will take me 6 decades and 4 years. I don't know about you, but I presume you already got the punchline, right? So take your age now, add 6 to 8 decades and 4 years, guess your chances of living that long. And now here's the devastating part. It will take you that long to do all the things you want to do in life. If you never, ever have another good idea. So that's a pretty good way of understanding why you aren't going to do it. Anyway, once you start making peace with the fact that you aren't going to do it, then it's much easier to do something like practice TED or whatever those good techniques are for your work, which are really not just ways for you to be better at your job. They're not ways for you to be more effective to the people around you. They're not ways to produce better work for your stakeholders. Yeah, that's true, but I don't care about any of that. What I care about is there are ways for me to increase my spare capacity. There are ways for me to move away from the bottleneck. So since I mentioned bottlenecks, now's a good time. So everyone in this room who hasn't read this book, this is your only homework. Your only homework after you leave this conference today is to get yourself a copy of The Goal and read it. It's one of those business novels. If you don't like business novels, I promise you this one is worth it. And really, the key point here is in understanding the concept of a bottleneck. We have a generic idea what it means, but really the important thing here is that every system, so everything is a system. I'm a system, you're a system, you're a system. Your bodies are systems. This room of people is a system. This conference is a system. This venue is a system. The cars going by are a system. Everything's a system. Systems within systems within systems. The idea there is, when you're interested in any of this stuff, you have to decide which system you want to talk about. And there's no wrong answer. Every system, you might be interested in the throughput of a system. So value, as Kevin, I think Kevin was talking about this a little bit this morning, right? Value is this nebulous thing that has no single definition. We all get to choose what is valuable to us, which unfortunately also means we're responsible for figuring out what's valuable to us. Existential crisis, check. So throughput is essentially trying to measure, you're choosing a way of measuring value in terms of output per unit time. And it might feel weird to do that, but in every system you can find a way to do that. That we'll call that the throughput. Now, the throughput of systems is generally not infinite. If we got to live in systems where the throughput, where the amount of value we spat out was effectively infinite, we would all go home, we would all be on vacation. We wouldn't have to worry about any of this stuff. That means that every system has a bottleneck. The bottleneck is the part of the system that constrains how much throughput goes through the whole system. There's theory of constraints in, I don't know, a minute, 20 seconds. And the only reason I bring this up is because bottlenecks help you figure out what you need to focus on. Bottlenecks tell you, this is the thing you need to focus on, this is the problem you need to focus on, this is the area you need to focus on. So what bottleneck could be helpful in here? And it turns out that, it turns out it's probably wrong. About 15 years ago, near the tail end of the time management craze, by the way, people criticize getting things done because, oh, this is just another time management technique. No, it isn't. The first half of the book is a time management technique, and the second half of the book is an existential crisis. So, time management was the rage in the 90s and the early 2000s, and then these two guys, one of them who has become infamous for being the one who wrote the big book that the President of the United States spent all his time lying in. He apologized for that, by the way. Before he did that, he helped co-write a book called The Power of Full Engagement. It's one of those ridiculous, businessy sounding titles that should turn you off, but it's actually quite a good book. And in that book, he talked about, the thesis of the book is, forget about managing time. Instead, manage energy. Which again, sounds vaguely New Age-ish, but what they really mean is that your energy, your personal energy, is your bottleneck. So here's the story. The way that they described it was, they did a whole bunch of coaching of tennis players. And so what they did is they coached tennis players because they wanted to figure out what made the top 20 tennis players in the world the top 20 players, instead of the top 200. And it turned out after observing them for a long time and talking to them for a long time, that it had nothing to do with technique. Everyone knew how to shoot, how to hit the same strokes. Some people had some strengths and others people had different strengths, but generally speaking, they all knew how to hit the same shots, and they hit them reasonably the same level. And they knew where they needed to go. They understood basic strategy. They understood about, trading off long shots with short shots. And they understood how to play on different surfaces. The difference, what made the number 118 tennis player 118, and what made the number 9 tennis player number 9, had to do with what happens between points. They actually hooked these people up to heart rate monitors and found out that the top 20 tennis players in the world reduced their heart rate by 15 to 20 beats per minute lower than the rest between points. They recovered better between points. That meant that they had more energy for the end of the match. Now this seems, I'll be frank, this sounds like bullshit. Until you go and take a look at the way that tennis tournaments tend to work is especially striking among the men because they tend to play 5-set matches instead of 3-set matches. By the way, I don't know why we still have this sexist system, but it is the way it is. I didn't choose it. So usually in a tennis tournament, there are 64 players, they just play down all the way to 1. Which means that in the first 2 rounds of the tournament, you have like the number 2 player like playing the number 62 player. It's a big difference in their recovery rates. And if you look at the scores in the first 2 rounds of tennis tournaments, you'll often see that the lower ranked player wins 2 of the first 3 sets, and then the higher ranked player kills them in the last 2. And you see that, like, it's statistically significant how often that happens. And that is, for me, that was enough to make me go, hey, maybe these guys really have something. So I'm going to act on the idea that energy is my bottleneck. So if energy is my bottleneck, then everything I do that drains me of energy makes it harder for me to give that to other people. And everything I do that allows me to recover my energy is going to help me. And that means doing things like reducing my own stress. I'm reducing my own stress not just because I'd like to live longer, but I'm reducing my stress because that gives me more spare capacity that I can use to then give to other people. Now, a lot of people have one big source of stress, which is their job. And this led me to this idea of what really is a dream job. And I figured out that I think the dream job is something that generates enough money, has a tolerable time commitment, and sustains your energy. Now you can get 2 out of these 3 relatively easily. And if you get these 2, if you have enough money and a tolerable time commitment, but it drains your energy, that's depression. I can tell you that firsthand. And if it generates enough money and sustains your energy, but it takes up all your time, that's called divorce. And if it's a tolerable time commitment and sustains your energy, but it doesn't generate enough money, that's called a hobby. If you get all 3, that's a dream job. And if you get none of them, that's called startup. So I like to say passion is bullshit because the success literature tries to convince you that if you're not passionate about your job, then you're doing it wrong. Remember, energy is your bottleneck. Whatever you need to do to generate more energy is probably going to help you. That way you will feel more comfortable giving that energy to other people. Which means, for example, that if you can find a job, if you find a job that you hate, but it generates enough money, and you only have to do it 35 hours a week, then that might be enough time for you to do other things in your life that help you recover your energy. So that you can then use that to give to other people. So one silly technique. Now there's another way to think, of course, another way to think about it is you can use one of the tricks that we use. My wife and I left Toronto in part because we did not value spending the amount of money that it took to continue to live in Toronto. It was a huge source of stress. Living there meant that I had to generate a lot of money, which meant that I had to increase the time commitments, and that killed my energy. So it made sense for us to leave. Why? Because if we could drop our cost of living by 75%, which we did by moving to the corner of nothing and nowhere, central Canada, we moved to a place called Dauphin, Manitoba, which is exactly how it sounds. It's 400 kilometers from Winnipeg, and Winnipeg is the worst place in the world to have a city. And it meant that traveling was a pain in the ass too, because we had to take a bus 2 hours so that we could take a bus 2 hours so that we could spend a night in a hotel so that we could get up the next day to take a flight to Minneapolis so that we could then take a flight to go where we actually wanted to go. And then, by the way, undo on the way back. Why did we go through all this? Well, because I need time to recover. What really mattered, it didn't matter that I didn't have to make all that money. I could find out that I could work 3 weeks a year to pay the bills. That seems like a tolerable time commitment, and that's what allowed me to recover my energy. I recognized at that point that adding more cash wasn't going to make me happier, and that selling to more clients wasn't going to make me happier. That what was going to matter to me was recovering my energy. So I did that for 2 years, until I realized that Dauphin, Manitoba is one level below the minimum viable lifestyle, so that we actually move somewhere better. We've been there for 9 years. So anyway, I bring all this stuff up because this, although this kind of looks impressive in its Venn diagram way, really all this does is comes back to the idea that energy is your bottleneck. We have a tendency to underestimate this part. That's why we have a lot of that. And if you are not willing to use the word depression to describe your situation, then cross that out and put burnout. It effectively means the same. Depression is just what happens when you don't pay attention to the burnout. Good time. So now, what are some other things? So, at some point, so you can use things like getting things done, or you can use this dream job model to help you figure out sort of how to get your own shit under control. But eventually, what's going to happen is that you're going to have that your bottleneck stops being your own shit and starts being the shit you have with other people. The difficulties in communicating with them, the difficulties in coordinating with them, all that kind of stuff. The easy part is getting your own shit under control. Now I don't have quite as much to do as I used to. I have some spare capacity. I want to start giving that to other people. And then my needs start to align with people around me. Now it's no longer being selfish. I'm ready now to be more of a team player. Now, for the programmers in the room especially, not exclusively, but especially, you might be like me in that you were not born as a natural keyboard person. Okay? I did not have the gift growing up. I have met people who had the gift growing up. They're the ones who were at the playground at the age of 8 and had all the other kids playing the game they wanted to play, even though they don't realize how that happened. Right? I was not one of those people. I was a programmer. I was attracted to computers at age 12 because they did what I told them to do, and these weird bags of meat wouldn't do what I told them to do. And then gradually I learned how to start dealing with that. And I learned this wonderful thing called the Satir interaction model. Now I teach the Satir interaction model in part or I should say I market it to programmers in part because I use this as a way to debug bad interactions. If you use the word debug, then programmers will start to pay attention. I don't want to explain the Satir interaction model to you now. I encourage you to go and look it up. This is a diagram from an article I wrote for InfoQ about a decade ago called Don't Let Your Miscommunication Spiral Out of Control. The basic idea here is that you have a few, I will mention the key points. So there are these 3 stages of interacting with people where things can go wrong, and so you can learn to check them. Right? I started using this model originally. I would get into a fight with somebody, there would be lots of screaming and crying, and then I would go over here, and I'm crying and I'm drinking wine, crying and drinking wine, and say, what the hell happened? And then I could replay the conversation in my mind and try to look for the places where things have gone wrong. The important part here is from significance to response. This is one of those things that I, as a programmer, had to just take as an axiom. I can't really prove it, but it seems to work. The interesting thing about this model for me is that the path from significance to response, from how you interpret a situation to how you respond to it, is effectively, well, I used to think it's effectively hardwired in the brain. I'll come back to that in a moment. I used to think that, and then I heard this wonderful podcast that tells me otherwise. The idea is that when a conversation or an interaction goes wrong, we have a tendency to want to change how people respond to it. And the fundamental irony of interaction is that the very thing that you want them to change is the thing that is the hardest for them to change. Because the path from their interpretation of what happened, how did it make me feel, to how they responded, is largely very deeply conditioned by culture. Individual culture, family culture, city culture, national culture, any of that. All that together, layer upon layer upon layer over decades, is what determines how people respond once they have chosen an interpretation for what happened. That's why I started this by saying, I'm going to do a bunch of reading here. I don't want you to consider this amateurish. I sensed that you might interpret what I did a certain way, and I tried very hard to offer you a different interpretation. This is a huge trick. If you say something to someone and they smack you in the face, telling them don't smack me in the face is probably not going to help. But asking them what interpretation they had that led them to believe that now is a good time to smack you in the face, if you learn that, then you can learn to offer them different ways of interpreting what happened so that it's less likely that they will smack you in the face in the future. So I spent a lot of my time in trying to understand. This is where Jerry Weinberg's law of 3 interpretations comes in. If you can feel that tension rising in your chest and you want to yell at somebody, if you haven't thought of at least 3 ways to interpret what has happened, don't react yet. That takes a lot of practice. I'll come back to that in a bit. So this is another trick that I use. I originally tried to, this is a model of motivation that comes from my good friend Dale Emery. One of the gentlest people I ever met. For those of you who know what the word TASCA word was, Dale is the only person for which we as a committee chose to invent a new award. We gave him the Award Cunningham Gentle Voice of Reason Award. Because he's such a huge, he's one of those people who's heavily influential, even though you've probably never heard his name. But if you talk to a bunch of people, they will all come back to, yeah, he's one of my influences. He's like the Jerry Weinberg nobody heard of. And he offered this way of understanding motivation. Again, this is a way to debug motivation problems. Why won't they do this thing that's obviously a good idea? Why won't they write tests? Why won't they ship code every 2 weeks? Why do they insist on waiting months? Why won't they finish something before they start the next thing? It's obviously good for them. Why don't they do it? Most people will feel motivated to do something if they know what to do and they know what will happen and they want that to happen. So if someone somehow resists doing something that you think is obviously a good idea, then one of these three things is probably missing. And I learned this, and I thought, now I have a way to debug people who don't know why, who won't do what I tell them to do. Now I know how to manipulate them. And gradually I began to understand this is a way to debug my own motivation. This is a way to understand why I don't do the things that seem to align with my values. What am I afraid of? It's not just, I'm afraid that I have to go to sleep. It's okay, well, either I don't know what to do, or I don't know what will happen, or I know what will happen and I don't want it to happen. I think I have time to share this story. So, every time I come to a conference in Europe, I bump into 2 or 3 people that I haven't seen in a really long time. Alf and I hadn't seen each other in a while. There were a couple of others. I guess David is one that I hadn't seen in a really long time. And I look a little differently than I did about 7 years ago. So I battled weight problems my whole life. And around 2011, I got all the way up to 145 kilograms. I'm telling you this story now because I want you to applaud. I'm telling you this story because I knew how to lose weight. I did it twice in my 20s. In my 20s, I lost 25 kilograms. And then gained it all back. And then 3 years later, I lost 35 kilograms. Of course, the second time you have to lose more. I lost 35 kilograms and then gained it all back. And I knew what I needed to do, but I couldn't sustain it. And that's why I kept gaining it all back. And it took 10 years to get to the point where somebody finally had an idea that clicked with me. See, the problem is I knew what to do. And unfortunately, I knew what would happen, which is that I would follow the program for 8 or 9 or 10 months, and then suddenly say, to hell with this. Stress would be too much. I would say, to hell with this. Fall off the wagon, go back to my old habits, and regain all the weight. Until somebody taught me this idea of cheat day. The general idea is simple. Follow the program for 6 days, and on the 7th day, eat whatever the hell you want. And I thought, that's an interesting idea. I can try that. Maybe I'll lose weight really slowly. But I'm in this for the long haul. I can do it. And I tried it. It didn't work. Now, after the 6th cheat day, I got sick. And I realized that the food that I normally ate actually made me sick after I spent 6 days eating the right stuff. When I say the right stuff, I mean the right food. The point of this is not to turn this into a weight loss seminar, but to say that the idea is that cheat day was the missing piece of information that allowed me to go from I know what to do, and now I know what will happen, and I want that to happen. The reason that the weight loss didn't work was because, unfortunately, I knew what would happen, and I didn't want that to happen. I would just follow the program for 8 to 10 months, and then fall away. I didn't want to do that again. Understanding my own motivation helped me notice the thing that I was missing when it finally found me. That doesn't mean that I know how to go find the thing that I'm missing. It meant that 12 years later, when suddenly I heard about this thing, I recognized, that was what was missing. That's what's going to stop this bad thing from happening. Let's try it. I won't say too much about English programming because I am running out of time. Normal for me. This is a wonderful book. If you have spare capacity, I recommend reading it. The thing about this book that I find most striking is that this book is coming close to 50 years old, and many of the stories in it could be told today. Not much has changed. Now, you have to call it egoist programming for programmers to pay attention, but really what you're trying to teach them is this. Another way that, now the nice thing about this stuff, what's really important about this for me, is this is another way for me to increase my spare capacity, to reduce my stress. Just another thing that I can do for myself, it has absolutely nothing to do with other people, this allows me to have more spare capacity to give to other people. I generally just feel calmer. I feel less stress. I let go of things more easily. Here's an interesting result from some psychological study that said that, so you might have heard this before. If you hurt yourself physically, right? You bang your hand on something. If you want the pain to go away faster, start swearing loud. Whatever language you want. I actually now start swearing in Swedish, that way people don't really realize what's going on, and it's fun for me. But swearing loudly and a lot actually literally reduces your feeling of pain. Unfortunately, when it comes to psychological pain, when it comes to fear, anger, disgust, whatever, the exact opposite is true. That if you vent your anger, you actually hold on to the anger longer. What you really want to learn how to do is to let that anger go. This is something that I do to help me let anger go. And fear, and all this revulsion, all those somewhat negative reactions. This is something I do purely so that I can increase my capacity so that I can share that with others. And one of the tricks that I use is this one. Now, I admit this might not work in other languages. But there's this really weird thing that happens where if you try to speak English, and I guess let's remove speak and make it write. It's very hard to do this with speaking. It's much easier to do in writing because you can. Try writing in English without using the verb to be in any of its forms. What this does is this stops you from labeling things. It forces you to describe things not as you think they are, but by describing your perception of things, focusing on, it's very easy to then separate facts from opinions. In fact, it's very easy to notice when you're stating an opinion but making it sound like fact. Because you can't say X is Y. I can't say that you are an asshole. I can say that I don't like the way you're acting right now. And that focuses the energy on something that I can do about myself, instead of about something inherent for you. So I started to do this because it sounded like a weird thing to do, and within 2 years I started to notice, and other people started to notice, that I treated them with much less judgment. I was more open, was more clear about what was an opinion, and I was more willing to change my mind about things. And I felt a lot better about how I interacted with people. That reduced my stress a whole lot, and that made it easier for me to give that to other people. And yes, I know, this has become a buzzword, it's getting boring, I'm sorry. Like, really sorry, not just Canadian sorry. Really sorry. But I have started experimenting with meditation. I've been doing this for the last 2 years, off and on. And I do see a difference. I do see that it allows me to let go of things more easily. Not just those negative emotions, but I have even started to get to the point where I started to notice it's easier to let go of expectations. I learned this very cool thing just a couple of days ago, that it's okay to, some people have the idea that if you are a perfect Zen Buddhist, that you never want anything. Well, no, it's okay to want things as long as you don't cling to the fear of not having them. It's okay to want things as long as you can make peace with not having everything that you want. It turned out that you can't always get what you want is Buddhist, not just a catchy lyric. So this is something that I've done. It's a trick that I've used. Not everyone is comfortable doing it. But I offer it to you as something that you can invest 10 minutes a day and try and see what helps you. And again, I'm trying to increase my spare capacity so that I can give to other people. Now I want to end by talking about one more, you know what, if we're going to be this touchy-feely, then we might as well go one step farther. I resisted for years learning about nonviolent communication. I resisted it in part because there were a couple of people in my Twitter feed who espoused nonviolent communication, who were some of the most violent communicators I had ever experienced. And anyone in this room at the intersection of the Agile community and the nonviolent communication community probably knows one name in the middle of that Venn diagram at the intersection. We won't speak his name, but you probably know about him. If you want to know about me, go ask me afterwards. So I resisted the idea because it seemed like it didn't work, because the people who seemed to espouse this stuff were pretty violent communicators. Until I finally broke down and I watched a couple of videos and I read a couple of books, not just books by Marshall Rosenberg, but books by people who like Marshall Rosenberg, and understood that nonviolent communication really has to do with the practical part of it. People call it practical, is this whole connecting with people at the level of their needs. And yeah, okay, that's interesting. Wouldn't it be nice if we could all do that? And we should practice that, and that seems like a nice thing. But really where it went next is where I want to end. That for me, what's interesting about nonviolent communication is this idea that it's this definition of violence that really surprised me the first time I heard about it. And the way that I think of it is that we as humans want to give of ourselves freely, in fact with glee, and give of ourselves to other people as much as we possibly can. We feel great when we allow ourselves to merely give of ourselves to others. And that doing something for somebody else for any other reason is violence. Doing it out of a sense of moral obligation is violence. Doing it out of an abstract sense of duty is violence. Doing it because I think I'm going to get something else in exchange later is violence. Now, I'm not really comfortable with judging all that stuff that way and labeling that stuff as violence, but I kind of understand that the idea is to sort of confront you with the ideas in the hope that it changes your mind, right? We need this thing called the pattern interrupt, where just you have this habit and somebody goes, and it's not because they want to hit you, because they need you to pay attention for a few moments because they're going to tell you something interesting. Labeling that as violence seems like a pattern interrupt. It's something that we should go, oh, wait, oh yeah, that does sound good. I'd like some of that, please. So remember that the idea of the selfish team player in stark contrast to the reactions that most people seem to have by the name or by the words. It feels to me like being a selfish team player is in living some of the values of nonviolent communication and doing that in the context of your daily work. I wanted to adopt the model of the selfish team player because I wanted not just to have the ability to give of myself to people. I didn't just want to help myself so that I could help others. I wanted to help myself so that I would become addicted to helping others. And maybe even that's not a term that you like, that maybe makes you feel a little uncomfortable. Let's try it this way. I wanted to help myself so that I could learn to love to help others. Even better, I wanted to help myself so that I could allow my own nature, the nature that wants to give, that wants to help others, so that I could get out of my own way and just naturally help others. That, to me, is what the selfish team player is about. It's about figuring out what it is that you need so that you will not only want, love, need deep in your soul to help others, but actually have the capacity to do it. Before I finish, I'd like to mention that I'm going to be back in Vienna on the 17th of November, which, of course, is the Global Day of Code Retreat. Please join us at TechTalk for the day. If you've never been to a code retreat before, then going to the Global Day of Code Retreat is a wonderful way to get introduced. It's a way for programmers to spend the whole day practicing without having to worry about producing any practical results. Please do give feedback about the session. I can take it. And let's not let the conversation stop here. Now, I'll make the same offer that I make to everyone. If you go to either ask.jbrains.ca or tell.jbrains.ca, they go to the same places, just one if you have a question and one if you want to share a comment. If you ask me a question, and if you're willing to wait indefinitely for an answer, that service is free. If you need stronger service level agreement than that, let me know. We'll talk about how much that costs. Thank you very much for your time and attention.